All right, guys. I do believe we are live. Welcome to another episode of the Break the Rules live stream. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, and today we're going to be talking about the recent attempt at Donald Trump's life at the golf course and whether what we're seeing is just another crazy person or whether it may be something deeper that's going on with the Intel apparatus. And I couldn't have two better people for this discussion today. We have Clint Russell, aka Liberty Lockdown, part of the Tower Gang, and we also have senior fellow of the Atlantic Council, Vlad Davidzon, aka the Dandy Warrior, frequent guests on BTR with Curtis Yarvin, aka Mencius Moldbug. I highly recommend everybody watching this to check out those episodes. They've argued back and forth about Ukraine, things of that nature. It's a lot of fun. But the reason why I think this is a good combo is that, Clint, you're coming at this from the more of the libertarian perspective and a very suspicious perspective of government. Like, you do not trust government, you do not trust any of these agencies, and you expect the absolute worst to come from them. And Vlad, you could say that you are part of the machine in a way, the Atlantic Council being a think tank associated with all these other facets of government, so you have the
I'm
insight.
a very
Yeah.
critical and very ironical and a very much a black sheep of the establishment. But yes, I am nominally speaking a figure in the establishment. I have the credentials, I have the protection, I have the sinecure, I have the anyway, I have the literally the passcode to the doors. I can buzz my way in. But I am I do come out of anarchism, and I am a very anarchic fellow. So I go on these podcasts, and which is why I enjoy talking to people like Mr. Russell. And I'm by the way, I'm interrupting a working vacation in Lisbon. I'm gonna keep drinking, and there are babies running around the cafe. So please, if I'm not making sense, it's the baby's fault.
No, this is perfect. I want you drunk so you'll tell the truth about the powers that be. This is going to be great.
So, Clint, what is your take on what's been going on here? Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, well, first off, this attack was 48 hours ago, so I'm not going to pretend as if I have a hard answer as to what we saw just a few days ago, and I'm not even going to pretend I have a hard answer to what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. All I know is that I believe, based off of the reporting from 2 days ago, that there has now been two attempts on Trump's life at minimum over the past little over 2 months now. On top of that, you have the FBI spying on Donald Trump way back before he was even president the first time. You have them lying to the FISA courts. You have multiple impeachments based off of nonsense, in my estimation, or at least things that were certainly not unique in terms of criminality. I think that Biden was definitely guilty too. So you have that. What else? I mean, you have the lawfare. You have him facing 800 years in prison. You have the treatment of the J6ers. It just seems as if the system has absolutely ramped up to do everything in its power to defeat, imprison, and ultimately potentially murder President Trump. And that's my concern. Then you look into the background of these investigations, you look into the background of the alleged assailants, and it becomes more and more murky, more and more mysterious and concerning. The Secret Service's behavior in Butler, Pennsylvania was atrocious, and that's the kindest way I can put it. And then the activity yesterday, the backdrop of the alleged assassin or attempted assassin is so bizarre. And I would love to actually talk to Vlad about that and see what he thinks about it, because it's so fucking weird. So yeah, that's my operating thesis at this point is like, well, they tried suppression, then they tried spying, then they tried censorship. I mean, they did platform the guy, then they tried jailing him, and now they have tried bullets. So that's how I perceive these things.
Yeah, Vlad, what do you think?
I actually don't disagree with quite a bit of what the gentleman said. I'm first of all, I'm not a Trump guy. Never voted for him. I
Me
don't
either, for
love
the record.
him. I never voted for him. Don't love him. Don't Don't think he's particularly competent or particularly good at managing anything. He has skills and skill sets. Obviously, his traits and qualities. A lot of them are very bad and very unpleasant, but he has traits and qualities. That aside, I've never voted for him. I'm not a Trump partisan. I'm not a Republican. I haven't even voted since 2016. I'm going to stop voting, and I don't even believe that journalists or analysts should vote. That aside, unlike 80-90% of my colleagues in the legacy media, I'm not a team player. I'm not on side with wanting to destroy him. I'm not an activist. I'm a journalist and analyst, and a lot of my colleagues forgot what they're supposed to be doing. And I agree with Russell, Mr. Russell. The FBI did some stupid things at the very least, or intervened in 2015, Operation Crossfire Hurricane, in the elections. We have the names of FBI agents who did all sorts of stupid stuff, to say the least, or they intervened in the elections. Um, they were using FISA warrants to go after Trump's guys. This is all true. The norms have all been canceled. The norms don't exist anymore. And I'm like an old school classical liberal with an anarchist heart who's a member of the establishment. But I don't disagree with Mr. Russell about all of that, including the fact that the elites have mismanaged the institutions to the point where we have a second assassination attempt against former president of the United States in 2 months. And to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, one assassination attempt is tragedy. Losing one parent is a tragedy. Losing both, as he said, the importance of being earnest, looks careless, right? One assassination attempt is a tragedy. Two assassination attempts, that looks careless, right?
But you didn't
So
leave it at
let's
that.
start with that.
But you'd leave it at
Let's
that,
start with
Vlad,
that.
right? Like, you wouldn't go all the way to saying, well, this guy is like some kind of a mind-controlled patsy or something like that. You haven't met him, but you do know people who have seen
I do
him.
know journalists who I know personally 2 or 3 journalists who have talked to him. One of them interviewed him for VFT. The other one interviewed him for the New York Times. Uh, there was an article in 2023 in the New York Times about weirdos and psychos and fanatics and opportunists and grifters who arrived in Ukraine in that crazy time of 2022, trying to be helpful or most likely trying to actualize their delusional fantasias of themselves. He was one of those guys, and he was a lot of that reporting by mainstream legacy journalists. His name comes up in 2023 in the New York Times piece about the weirdos who arrived there, and he was involved. But the Ukrainians, who are really qualified to understand who's a weirdo, quickly figured out that he's a Osborne type character who is just like schizoidal, insane, psychotic. I mean, he's probably
Oswald.
insane.
Oswald type
Yeah,
character.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Lee Harvey Oswald, the JFK
Lee
guy.
Harvey Oswald type. Yeah, I mean, these kinds of characters are always. There's a baby right next to me, so if there's yelling, it's fine. Not my baby. I hope. There's always these kinds of there's always these kinds of characters who pop up in world historical situations who are like lumpen proletariat, to use the old school language, who are weirdos, who are opportunists, who are gliding in the shadows. And he's one of these kinds of characters who popped kind of that moment of 2022 was my mom is calling me. My mom will call me over and over and over again until like put the phone
Oh,
down over and over and
Jewish
over again. My mom's
mothers,
calling me one
you
second.
know. So
She's
no
gonna do it
problem.
5 or 7 more times. I'm gonna keep talking. Oh, she understood not to call me on the fourth time. That's fine. Love you, mommy. Um, but we're enmeshed, being Jews and whatever. Anyways, uh, there are all sorts of weirdos who popped up on the scene, and I met a lot of these freaks, real hardcore freaks. Now I'm diaspora, like I'm from there. My ancestors are from there. I have a really deep attachment to these lands. I've been there since 2010. I married a Ukrainian lady. I spoke Russian at home. I read Ukrainian Russian literature in college. I'm deeply into this. These kinds of characters pop up in the middle of war, in the middle of exciting situations, and they're troublemakers. And the Ukrainians needed manpower, and they needed guys with military experience, but they became very good at kind of getting rid of these kinds of characters who volunteered for the Foreign Legion in 2022. So he was just a typical kind of weirdo freak on the freak zone, on the freak curve,
Never a member of Azov Battalion. Right? He was not a member of Azov Battalion. Vlad? Oh, you gotta unmute yourself, buddy. You muted yourself. By the way, everybody subscribe while Vladislav is
I don't
there.
hear you, man. Is it Lev? I don't
Yes.
hear you. One second.
Yes. Can you hear me right now? Can you hear me? No? Yes? Maybe? Because I'm hearing you. Anyway, we're going to figure this out. Vlad's going to maybe call back from that situation, in Lisbon, and we're going to figure that out. Here we go. One more shot. Vlad, can you hear me, my friend? Okay, while we're figuring out with Vlad, Clint, what do you think of what Vlad was talking about just now?
He talked a lot. I mean, I agreed with much of what he said, but I didn't feel as if there was really a case being made or a conclusion. It's like, yeah, I think that I don't even know how to pronounce his name for sure at this point, but Routh or Ruth. I think that he's obviously a weirdo to the highest level, super weird character. The question is, based off of his double-digit felony charges and the fact that he was still free, not just a free man, but also
Sorry.
able to
I
travel
was
the
out
world.
for a minute. I'm back in. Just keep talking. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just talking about Routh, and I agree with your assessment that he's probably an adrenaline junkie and a lunatic and a true believer. Based off of his interviews, he comes across as if like, yeah, this guy. I mean, he breaks into tears as he's describing. I forget who he was speaking to, but it was I think it was in Hungary. He was talking to like CNN or something, and he's getting interviewed. He breaks into tears because he's so committed to this cause, and he's talking about the soldiers there and their plight, particularly Foreign Legion soldiers, and how beautiful it is to see people come together to fight for this cause. So he's a true believer. Like, I don't have any doubt about that. The question then becomes like, is he MK Ultra level nutty that they have actually screwed this guy's brain up and he's acting on their behalf, or is he just a lunatic who for some reason was free to walk around despite having terroristic charges and WMD charges because he had a fully loaded gun and a bunch of other charges that that all were chasing this guy, but he was still able to travel to Poland to get into Ukraine and then spend months there and then come back. And then he was also allowed to be outside of Trump's golf course from 1 a.m. until 1 p.m. when, just by the grace of God, some Secret Service agent sees the barrel of the rifle sitting out of the sniper's nest and they shoot at him. He flees. He gets into his vehicle. They barely catch him. Okay, maybe. I mean, the on its face, the story is kind of nutty at this junction. So I don't know what to believe. I just think it's extraordinarily suspect.
Vlad, what do you think of that? Keep clicking. You'll make it. You'll make it. I mean, look, the fact that we're able to have conversations with people who are all the way in the cafe in Lisbon, Portugal, and to have it work, I think that already is an extraordinary thing.
Cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. And we got to be grateful. We got to count our blessings for things like that. But as far as what you were talking about here, your assumption is that because he was allowed to have access to, this transportation despite these gun charges and access to where the golf course was and all of that, that would create, a suspicion that this guy may be covered by this deep state apparatus that's allowing him to do that.
It's not even that he's covered, but he's definitely known. I mean, I think Vlad would probably even acknowledge that
He's known to the Financial Times and the New York Times, who have interviewed him for pieces about crazy people who came to Ukraine. That is pretty well known, I have to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, so he's known on that level, but I would love to hear Vlad's opinion on this take. Like, the Foreign Legion, I mean, I would like to know if he believes what I do, that the U.S. State Department, along with Victoria Nuland and the Barack Obama administration, was largely responsible for the Maidan Revolution, the turnover of power in 2014, No, he's shaking his head. All right, go ahead.
We'll get to
I
that
know, man.
part.
So here's the thing.
Yeah.
If only I'm a kind of a in fact I voted for Barack Obama, and I regret doing so because they didn't do enough for my taste. The Obama administration, in fact, told the Ukrainians not to fight in 2014 when Crimea was annexed, and the State Department told the Ukrainians that we would take care of it, i.e., there would be real sanctions. There was no real sanctions regime in 2014, which arguably led to Afghanistan, to a lot of red lines, re-Syria, re-Libya. Never weaklings. Not only I know Victoria Nuland's family. I know all those people. I'm in Washington D.C. I was just at a Passover Seder with her daughter and son. I mean, I know the family. I was literally just at a Passover Seder with them 4 months ago. Lovely people, by the way. Victoria Nuland uh, is a bogeyman for neoconservatism, and neoconservatism is a different thing. But the Barack Obama administration, first of all, were not neocons, and secondly, they wanted a peace deal, JCPOA, with Iran, and in order to keep that from falling apart, they needed the Russians for the heavy lift of the negotiations. So they let Ukraine in 2014 go so that they could have the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, so that they could, but that they could make their big foreign policy, wish come true.
So your friend Victoria's phone call with Jeffrey Pyatt is just them having tea and crumpets about the the turnover
I
of
would
power.
I would not say she's my friend, but George Pyatt was very nice to me, and I'd call him a friend.
Okay.
I mean, look, the U.S. Got involved on the negotiations level, on giving advice, although any Ukrainian government could ignore that advice, on which politicians would have which governor post. That is a real phone call that was leaked between Pyatt and Nuland, and
And when she said
my,
"fuck the EU," she still came across as a really nice lady to you.
she's a diplomat, and one doesn't get to the top of a slippery pole without being a tough woman, right?
Sure, sure.
No one gets to the top of a State Department or any kind of hierarchy really without having balls of
This is
steel.
this is fucking thrilling to me, man, because I am so excited to talk to someone who knows Victoria Nuland. This is amazing. All right, I'll shut up. Go ahead.
Kids. I know her
Yeah.
kids, and I know her. I know her brother-in-law better, and I know the Kagans better, and I know. I
You know the
kids a little
Kagans?
bit.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
I was just
dude.
on a vacation.
See, these are the kind of connections that only happen on Break the Rules. This is why you guys must subscribe right now. Where else are you going to
do
have
that.
these kind of bridges built?
I was on vacation with him for a week. Does that count as knowing him?
Yeah, that certainly counts.
Okay, I know. Yeah, I spent a week with him.
Wow.
Does that count this year?
Yeah,
I
you
mean,
know for sure.
Yes, yes,
Dude,
yes.
you associate with some of the scariest human beings I've ever encountered.
They're
But
not. They're nerdy. They're nerdy Jews from Washington D.C. I have to tell you. I was trying to
well,
say.
they may be
They're like, I
nerdy
love-
Jews, but they're also responsible for the death of millions of people over the past 20 years.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing. I was absolutely, as an 18-year-old 20 years ago, I marched against the war in Iraq. It was a stupid idea then. 18-year-old me somehow got it right when they were wrong. There was a delusional fantasia in America for a long time about being able to reprogram some of the most primitive and undeveloped parts of the world to be American. That was a delusion that didn't work out right. That's true. Were the Kagans themselves incorrect on their analysis of what could go right or wrong if done correctly? I don't know. I was right as a 18-year-old. I'm right as a 39-year-old that we should have not have done it. Obviously, after September 11th, something needed to get blown up. But you don't need to invade Iraq and Afghanistan just after a police operation. So again, you and I don't disagree. I just happen to be in the room and you're outside the room.
Yeah, but I'm also, when you're outside the room, you're able to acknowledge that I'm right, that those wars should have never happened, and that Kagan and Nuland absolutely advocated nonstop for those wars to happen. So how could you not say that they were obviously wrong? They were obviously wrong.
Yeah. I mean, if we could go back in time and cancel the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, our country would be a much better place, and there would be having many fewer problems. We would not have squandered the peace dividend of the post Cold War peace, And again, just to repeat myself and be a bore, America would be a much better place if we didn't invade either Iraq or Afghanistan. So,
Yeah,
I don't disagree.
we'd be about 10 trillion less in debt. We wouldn't have so
No.
much of the Middle East despising us. We wouldn't have the immigration crisis that's happening in Europe to a large extent. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
trauma, a lot of psychological
Yeah.
trauma. It's just like you can't put a dollar tag on American trauma. And 2.7 million Americans cycled through Iraq and Afghanistan over 20 years. Those are people with that's not a small number of voters. I mean, obviously they're spread out across America, but those are people who had direct experience of two screwed up wars. That's
Yeah.
2.7 million people. That's a lot.
So it would be
You know?
understandable then, Vlad, that when people saw what happened in Iraq and now they're seeing Ukraine, it ends up being kind of like a boy cries wolf type of scenario. Like, why would they believe the same people that dragged America into Iraq when it comes to this? I think that's where
Yeah,
a lot
no,
of
that's a legitimate argument. That's a legitimate argument. The problem is that Europe is our backyard. America is, to one degree or another, and the leftists will kill me, but let's whatever. Who cares? America is a suburb of Western civilization. We are a descendant of European culture, whatever. Judeo-Christianity, the Bible, the Greeks, the Romans, the Enlightenment, et cetera, et cetera. We can all do the genealogy. America is an extension of Europe, and Europe is very important to us in a way that uh, if there was no oil or security threats in Iraq, it would not be to us in the same way that Eastern Europe is, right? It's a core interest of our alliances, NATO, of our treaty obligations to protect people who worship like us, look like us, are our relatives, our cousins. I mean, America is part of Europe in a way, right?
I mean,
Europeans founded America.
these are a lot of assertions which are agreed to by the broader establishment apparatus. They are completely rejected by my people, the libertarians, the non-interventionists. I'm of the opinion that NATO should have ended when the USSR fell. I lost Vlad, but I'm of the opinion that NATO should have ended when the USSR fell. Like, why are we now just stuck defending Europe as they refuse to even contribute the necessary funds to the the whatever it's called, the bucket, the NATO bucket of funding.
No, that's 100% correct. The Europeans let go of the opportunity to raise their defense budgets, and in some ways lived off of American largesse. They were I wouldn't use the word parasite, but they were defense. What is in political science they call it? Defense lowriders or defense second riders or whatever.
Yeah.
The problem is this, which is forgotten by a lot of well-meaning people, is that we kept the Europeans from killing each other for 50 years by not allowing them to rearm. The point of having America be 75% of NATO spending and power is that we keep the Europeans from killing each other in the process. Like the point is always to keep the Germans and the French from rearming and starting the next war, right? World War III, World War V, World War 12.
See, Vlad, can I interject on that? Because
Please.
I hear that argument, but at the same time, I always perceive these kind of, what sound as if they're well-intentioned or even moral plans and arguments, but ultimately, what does it do? It infantilizes a portion of the world. It ultimately puts an additional burden on the American people, both financially, morally, otherwise, and then it also builds tensions in areas that otherwise may not be transpiring. Like, for instance, it seems quite evident to me that Russia and Germany wanted to get along. I mean, because of the natural necessity.
Russians bought the German government and bought
fine.
the German industrial economy. This is true.
Sure. But I mean, the main reason that they want to get along is because the industrial on the German side, and then the precious metals and sorry, not precious metals, the natural gas, the oil is the primary export from Russia. It's like there's a natural symmetry there, or synergy, I should say. So because of our relationship, in trying to divide them, particularly with the Nord Stream attack, which has now been acknowledged to some extent that it was at least the Ukrainians that were responsible for it. I'd be interested to hear if he wants to confirm or deny that. With alleged foreknowledge of the CIA, he was told to stop it, but he allegedly could not. I'm talking about Zelensky. But obviously that put a fissure between the German people and the Russian people that would otherwise not be there. So basically what I'm saying is the argument that I'm making is that, yes, perhaps we kept these savage Europeans from killing each other for 50 years, but also we're now on the precipice of nuclear World War III as a consequence of our consistent intervention and inflaming tensions over there. So that's my fear, is that, yes, maybe perhaps you have diminished warfare for a time, but it has only built tensions to a breaking point.
Okay, so there's a lot there. One, yeah, the Germans did something stupid by getting rid of their nuclear. They were not able to figure out how to decouple their economy from the Russians. And so the Russians basically bought Schroeder and his people and German elites for a generation, and that's what happened. That's true. Two, NATO was listless for about 20 years, and that found its role in that benighted war that we just talked about in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was reaffirmed in its existence later when the Russians began going back to Russian historical tendency, which is to be a continually expansionist regime. Russia just took a vacation from being Russia after the collapse or dissolution of the Soviet Union. They were always going to go back. It was overdetermined to being an imperial power. And Russia's neighbors, the ones who were lucky enough to get out and into NATO and the European Union, are okay. The ones that were not assimilated into security blocks are not okay. And it's a defensive alliance which keeps people from invading you. No one's ever yet invaded a NATO country other than when, like, the Belgian army, I think, accidentally went into Luxembourg or something like that, right?
Or when the Ukrainians bombed Poland last year.
Well, I mean, that was an accident. They were trying to knock down a Russian.
I know.
It's true. I know. Technically, you're right. Intention does matter. As in friendship, intention really matters,
Yes,
You know, you're my friend. What your intentions were really matters, right?
Yes.
We were trying to shoot down a Russian missile, and it just went in the wrong direction and killed two poor Polish farmers.
Yep.
So, like, it's a defensive alliance, and everyone can be part of whatever alliance they want. And if Ukraine and Georgia had been allowed into NATO 10 years ago, they wouldn't have wars now. Every part of the former Soviet Union, which is not part of an alliance, got invaded. That's just the way it is. You might say that spheres of influence are better, but I don't think that's the case. And
So
I really wish...
you don't think had they attempted to push Ukraine into NATO a decade ago that it would have just expedited this invasion and this war?
So here's the thing. I know for a fact because I interviewed the ambassador at the time, of the American ambassador at the time.
You're talking about the head of the CIA, William Burns?
No. I'm talking about 2008 during the Budapest NATO meeting. No, that was the 94. There was the Budapest meeting of NATO in 2008,
Oh, yeah.
and at that point the Europeans and the Americans gave mixed messages to the Russians and the Ukrainians about not giving them a map, right? So because Ukraine had a divided government at that point, the executive was a pro-Russian and the prime minister was a pro-European, pro-Ukrainian party. They never actually made the formal offer, and there was no actual map, which is a membership action plan was offered. There was flirtation, and flirtation actually is the worst of both possible worlds because it doesn't give you deterrence and it scares the other guy. So you either should offer.
You and I agree on that,
right? So the Americans.
But Vlad, do you not
Yes.
think that it's at some point it is reasonable to treat the Russians with the level of respect that America would demand, in that they are a enormous nuclear power. They obviously have the capacity to destroy the world 100 times over. So do we.
So do we.
We would
150
never.
times over.
yes, we would never, ever, ever allow the Russians to dictate, leadership when it comes to Canadian or Mexican or, we saw what happened in Cuba. Why
I
why
mean,
is it why do you think it is acceptable to put a defensive alliance on their doorstep in Ukraine given their history between one another?
well, I don't think we were putting it there. I think the Eastern Europeans were like begging to be part of it because historically anyone who's not defended of the Russians gets invaded by them.
Yes, that
That's the
is their
problem.
concern. I understand, but at the same time,
It's legitimate. Yeah.
and it is legitimate to a certain extent. But at the same time, you also have the leaked cables between Condoleezza Rice and William Burns that is describing this as the reddest of red lines, and that this cannot be allowed to happen. That Ukraine will not be allowed to be a member of NATO. It will absolutely create the dynamic by which they have to invade. That's their own words. They did not want to invade. You're describing them.
I've never seen those. Honestly, I've never seen those cables. I mean, I know many things. That's not one of those things that I know. Um,
Oh, that's
Look,
interesting.
I've never seen those cables. Different leaders have different analysis of the situation. I don't think that NATO is that important to Russia because the outcome of this war was that Finland and Sweden entered NATO, and there's no actual capacity in NATO countries to invade Russia. The simple fact that we don't have any weapons or troops there. Everything is about nukes now and
Yeah. It appears
nuclear
that there's something
suppliers.
unique about Ukraine. I'll grant you that it is something unique to them.
Yeah, it's
But
psychological. You're getting to it, man. It's
yeah.
deeply psychological for the Russians. They can't have it leave because there's no empire about Ukraine.
Well,
And
but it's also strategic. I think that Crimea and Sevastopol and the year-round warm water port there matters to them tremendously. So I
well, they
think there's
want it. Of course, they want it, man. Of
yeah.
course, they want it. Sure, but like I want to own half of Hawaii. I mean, like, are my desires legitimate? I don't know. You
Well,
know,
it's a little bit different in that Ukraine used to be a part of the USSR. So I
I
think
mean, it
that's
used to be part of Turkey, man. It used to be like the Turks also want it. The Turks also have desire for it. It used to be,
Yeah.
like it really belongs to the Crimean Tatars. Like the Crimean Tatar people, the indigenous people of Crimea are these like nice Turkish-speaking Crimean Tatar people, right? And they're like nice people, and because of Russian imperialism, they're like what 11, 12, 14% maximum of the population of Crimea, and that's because of what Russians have been doing in Crimea for 200, 250 years, right? And so, like, it's true that Crimea was part of a Russian empire, but it's also true that in 1991 we all agreed to stop territorial demands on each other, and the lines that we all agreed on, by we I mean all the post-Soviet and Soviet people, we all agreed, with a few small exceptions of wars in like Armenia and Azerbaijan and Georgia and Moldova, that there would be no territorial problems, right, or demands, or chauvinism, or annexationism. We all said we would stop asking for our property, that we all live where we wound up when the Soviet Union collapsed or dissolved. And so the Russians, kind of in that way, avoided the Yugoslavian problem, which is because we're all mixed and we all started killing each other for 30 years. But on the other hand, they're not keeping to their end of the bargain, which is stop demanding territory that you signed off on in 1991. Right? We had the deal. Everyone agreed to it. All 15 countries agreed to the borders, and like it's better for everybody if those 15 countries keep their borders and not kill each other.
Well, is it not also the case that America has gone back on its word after 91 too?
But like, here's the thing: people say that. Like, where is it written in any treaty or memorandum or anything that Ukraine or Lithuania or Latvia or Moldova would never join NATO? It's not enumerated in, like, there were conversations off the record about
Yeah, there was
what
off the
things
record conversations that are well documented from almost
they're
every
not they're
diplomat.
not well
Yes,
documented,
yes, they
man.
are. They are. I
There's a lot of
promise you.
speculation. I've looked into these pieces. There are a lot of conflicting accounts of what was said in private meetings, but private meetings are not law. International law is international treaties, man.
I grant you, they screwed up by not getting in writing.
There's also another element here which I think people forget. When Russia came out of the Soviet Union stage, I think a lot of Americans had no idea what exactly it was going to be. It could have been something completely different. There was a more liberal government in Russia by the time that Putin was a prime minister, and I believe that they managed to solve all their debt issues by that point. And Americans, if they were just observing it, they would have thought, hey, you know what, maybe these guys are going to be just like any other European country, but instead ended up going the authoritarian, totalitarian route it is going to right now. So at that point, you can't really say, well, the people who I would love for these people to be, it's not that anymore. They're going in a completely different direction. And the question that I want to pose to Clint is, how do you deal with a power that says, if you guys are not going to allow us to take this piece of territory, then we're going to nuke you? And imagine that happens over and over and over again. How do you deal with that as a libertarian?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the hardest question. It's the biggest challenge. This is why I would like to see greater efforts to denuclearize the world, because I think it's extraordinarily dangerous to have that capacity in human hands, regardless of who it is. I'm not sure that his argument from my side of the fence has not been that either you give me this land or I'll nuke you. It's that he has at least verbally he has declared that he wants it to be a neutral territory, that he does not want it to be added to NATO. Now that's different when it comes to Crimea. They had a lease on Crimea, and they believe that was torn up after U.S. State Department. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, man, but like they also, I'm sorry to say, but they also just annexed 4 more territories, annexed territories they didn't control, which is weird. They just annexed 4 more Ukrainian territories.
Yes, I'm aware, but that's also, given the circumstances that they're facing, it kind of makes sense to me too. They according to the peace treaty that they had 1 month after the invasion, that was torn up because of U.S. State Department interference, in my opinion, as they sent Boris Johnson over there to nuke it. No pun intended. That was part of the agreement, is that those 4 eastern territories that they just annexed were going to be independent and basically be a buffer between them and what would be an independent Ukraine. I think that would have been the more peaceful outcome, the one that would have kept hundreds of thousands of additional Ukrainians and Russians alive. And the State Department did not want that, and I think that's why we face this quagmire and this nuclear escalation trap that we're facing. As to your question about a madman with a nuke that's saying,
I'd like to get back to that, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, and I would love for you to. But as for the madman with a nuke who's saying, give me this land or I'll nuke the world, I haven't really seen that be the argument, but if that becomes an argument, and it certainly could in the not too distant future, because there's more and more nation states that possess nuclear weapons, I don't know what you do in that situation, like especially if they're serious, if they will actually do it. I don't know what you do. I guess you have to call their bluff at some point, but then you risk the fate of humanity.
But that has been what Putin's been talking about so many times by now. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I do recall whenever there was any kind of escalation of sending in more weaponry to Ukraine, Putin's government always responded, well, if you cross this line, then we're going to send out the nukes. He's had visuals.
You understand why, though, right? I mean, what he's describing is
because they're imperialists, man. That's why.
Well, you can make that argument. I would make the argument that America has been the imperial force over the past 30 years since the USSR fell. You raise your eyebrows at that. You disagree?
I'm just gonna communicate entirely with raised eyebrows.
No, it's almost it's almost like a grass is green on the other side type of thing. I'm afraid when it comes to Russians, just because like Clint, you're a really cool guy, you're really smart, but I'm not sure how many Russians you've met and how many people in general.
My dad's married to one. I talk to her every day.
That must be the secret Russian influence coming in.
No, not at all. She actually never talks to me about the Russia-Ukraine situation. She hates it.
Well, the point that I'm getting to, though, Clint, is that I think that Russians in general tend to be viewed by non-Russians, like Westerners, like especially Americans, as, hey, these are just like other white people. They look like us, they should be reasonable. They should listen to reason. And I think that what's missing from this equation is how completely completely
fact that
different.
we have Asiatic minds.
Yes. No. That's kind of true because, and I keep harping on this, but I think it is important. A lot of the Russian people were for a long, long time owned by the Mongolians, as afterwards they were owned by the European royalty. The cousin of the Russian Emperor Nicholas II was the King of England at the time. You know, like these were completely different people than the people that were being ruled. So I just think that their mentality
100%.
is one of like this Eastern despotism where they do get off on conquering territory. It kind of makes them forget about all the misery that they are experiencing in there.
You hang out with Ukrainian soldiers, and they'll be like, "Yeah, of course, it's like the Mongol horde. It's in their genes." I'm not gonna go that deep into like civilizational essentialism, but basically, Russia does have some aspects of like continuous expansion as it's raised on that. It's not liberalism. It's not democracy. It's just like Russians are like a imperialist state.
Wait, I could give
what they've done for 400 years, man.
Before we go further, I want to give a couple of examples that I had written down here before of what exactly like the Russian officials were saying all this time. Because if we're talking about, are they reasonable? Can they make a deal? So in one example, Putin said that Poland must be reminded that its western territories were a gift from Stalin, in reference to his claim that Poland wants to take Ukrainian territory. And another one over here, one of his closest advisors, Andrei Ilarionov, said that Putin sees the granting of independence to Finland in 1917 as an act of, quote, treason against national interests, and that Putin's view is that he protects what belongs to him and his predecessors. And this year, Putin signed this decree allocating funds for the search, registration, and legal protection of Russian property abroad, including property in the former territories of the Russian Empire and Soviet Union, including Alaska. And Medvedev, who was the Russian president and number two of Putin, has claimed that the Baltic countries, they also belong to Russia, and referenced Poland as being, quote, temporarily occupied, alluding to the NATO presence there. And recently Medvedev said that there will always be a chance for another conflict between his country and Ukraine after the current war ends, giving one more indication that no peace between these two countries is possible. So this is just like one of many, many, many of these signs that the Russian media, the Russian government itself, not so much the Russian media going to Westerners, not like the RT people, but if you actually watch like actual Russian media within Russia, they're all the time talking about how we're going to go beyond Ukraine, we're going to acquire parts of Germany, we're going to acquire all these lost parts of the Russian Empire, and the people there genuinely believe that. And the other problem that happens is that Russian media, number two, it's for the Russian people. Number one, Russian media is like a feedback loop with Putin. So the number one audience for Russian media is Putin himself. So they say these things, and then he also kind of gets into this feedback loop where it's like, the media is telling me this.
Himself on Fox News and
yeah.
I don't actually I don't actually disagree with much of what you guys are saying. I think that the difference in worldview perspective that I have from you guys is that I think that the American people and the American government functions in almost the exact same fashion. That we have feedback loops. We have this basically conquest narrative. We just do it, with the mask of neoliberalism that we are spreading, freedom and democracy across the world. We're not just doing it for the sake of conquest. We're not savages. We're doing it because we're the good guys and we're bringing peace to the world. Blah blah blah.
I mean, look, Clint, is the world a better place if it's ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, Putin, or the American Navy patrolling the
America?
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Okay, there you go, Clint. I'll buy you a drink.
Yeah. I mean, everything you're saying, Clint, is legitimate. I mean, you can only, think back to that George Floyd mural in Afghanistan that as soon as the Taliban took over, they got rid of it. Obviously, we have a lot of people here that have a particular worldview that they want to impose on the world. But in terms of, priorities here, most people, unfortunately, those who, let's say, support Ukraine a lot, are going to be of the opinion that everything that the deep state, that the blob, as Curtis Yarvin calls it, or the cathedral wants to do is good and should be done, and we should have all these transgender bathrooms in Timbuktu or whatever. But
Right.
yeah, but the other side is
that's also insane, extraordinarily provocative, and very dangerous. So I just don't like Vlad, and it seems as if you do to a certain extent too, perceive our own imperial pressures to be like a net positive for the world. And I can make the argument that yes, in some regards, it is preferable to the other imperial forces that exist, or the other imperial desires that exist from these other nations. But it still doesn't make it necessarily the moral or just thing to be doing.
Man, we don't actually like take over countries and just like
No, we
don't
just topple their leadership over and over again until we get someone that we like.
like I mean, first of all, doing it to like an Islamist dictatorship like we did in Afghanistan, which was, like a stupid idea, because there's nothing you could do to make it into liberal democratic Portland or Texas. There's just nothing.
No
to
shit.
do. Yeah. There's just not. They're just like too far behind the curve of history. Getting Pashtun tribesmen to become Texans in one generation is possible. It's possible if you. It's possible if you import those Pashtun tribesmen to Texas and make them live there. You can make them American. You can import them to America.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm not interested in doing that. Thank you, though.
Yeah, I mean, that
whatever,
brings
you don't
us
have
that brings us to
You
the
don't have to do
cats.
that,
They're
but you
eating the
can't bring
cats.
Texas
They're
to
eating the
America,
dogs. Oh,
Yeah, we don't
man.
have to do that. Like, you don't have to. Some amount of Pashtun tribesmen are okay. Too many Pashtun tribesmen, your local cuisine improves, but your demographics don't improve. Obviously, these are choices that policymakers and people make. But like, you can't export America to the Pashtun tribesmen. You can only bring them to America. And on this we agree. And that was stupid, and it was ridiculous and delusional. And yet, supporting our core American interest in Eastern Europe is not the same thing as trying to reshape illiterate Pashtun tribesmen to behave as if they're Western Europeans. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, no, I agree it's not the same thing, but it's also not the same thing in terms of risk and reward. I mean, what we're talking about is nuclear powers that are now at loggerheads. That's very different from what was transpiring in the Middle East, which was very significant wars, very costly, very bloody, but it did not imperil the entire planet. It did not imperil all of humanity.
But that again brings us back to the initial question of, if a power says we're going to nuke you, or if you don't give up this territory, it's always going to go back to that, man. So like, what do we do?
Yeah, well, again, as I said earlier, I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, it's mutually assured destruction. That's smart,
man.
That's what we.
At least you're smart, man. Like you're. No one does. I mean, obviously,
nobody does. And if you listen to John Bolton, or if you listen to Newland, well, you just call their bluff. These fucking cowards, they're never going to do it. You just call their bluff over and over again. Well, the problem is that you don't know. You don't know that they're bluffing, and I don't know that they're bluffing either. And they pretend as if they know, but they don't know.
They're not going to nuke America. They're not going to nuke America because...
No, my deep concern is that there could be a nuclear exchange inside of Ukraine. Like, that's what I'm really fearful of, particularly if they authorize those Storm Shadow missiles to strike inside of Russia.
We've told, by we, I mean the American government, have told the Russians that if they do it, the guys who order it will spend the rest of their life living in an underground bunker in Siberia. Nobody wants to spend their next 30 years living in an underground bunker in Siberia.
But see, this is the type of calling the bluff wager that you're assuming will work. Like, how do you know that will work?
I mean, there are a few telltale signs. So, for example, when we had that recent attempted coup by Putin's chef, what's his name? I keep forgetting. Prigozhin, exactly.
Yeah.
Clint, do you remember what happened when there was that attempt? Putin and his friends,
shot his plane down.
Well, no. Before that, when the actual attempt was going on, nobody shot any plane down except for Prigozhin, shooting a helicopter down. Putin and his friends, they all fled. they got away from the capital.
Yeah, they're cowards, man.
Yeah.
They're cowards.
So
They're not gonna.
I'm just saying, like,
know.
this is just like one example of this Potemkin village that I think comes around because of the West's, and particularly America's, romanticism of Russia. You know, I think of Dostoevsky. You know, Trump recently said, like, Russia, you know, beat Napoleon, even if it was the weather that beat Napoleon. And pretty much most of the battles that Russia fought, it lost. It lost against the Japanese. It lost against, I mean, you know,
Russia loses wars all the time, and Afghanistan won a war against nuclear-armed Russia. Vietnam won a war.
They also won a war
nuclear-armed-
against nuclear-armed America.
When? I mean,
Well, the Vietnam
who's
War-
who's currently in charge of Afghanistan?
oh, well,
I mean, we left. I mean, like we left.
Yeah, after a
stupidly.
20-year quagmire. I mean, it
100%, yeah.
didn't go smooth.
Didn't go smooth. We shouldn't have gone in there, and we should have left in a smooth way. And having decided,
My argument is
we-
that it doesn't mean. I mean, just because the USSR lost in Afghanistan, everyone loses in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
We
the,
also
the
did.
Point, the point is that they lost to a a non-nuclear opponent, and they didn't use nuclear weapons. Russia
I know.
loses wars all the time, and nuclear-armed powers have, on multiple occasions, lost wars or skirmishes to non-nuclear powers without ever deploying nuclear missiles. It's happened multiple times.
but we have not had what amounts to as close to live fire between two nuclear powers as what we are about to witness in the next week.
Well,
I mean, you
we
have to
don't
admit
have-
that you have to acknowledge that this is a paradigm shift in terms of these Storm Shadow missiles being authorized.
No. Here's
by
the thing.
Blinken.
Like they said the same thing about the Crimea, then they said something about the bridge, then they said something about the tanks. But we were getting them.
This
we
is
said something
this
about
is
the
actual
F-16s.
this is actual internal Russian strikes from.
Look, man, Clinton. We're already allowing the Ukrainians to use American artillery inside of Russia. That's already happened.
But this
I mean,
is
they
with-
have, and they haven't
this
nuked
is-
anybody yet.
You know how the Storm Shadow missiles work, right?
I do actually, yes.
Okay,
And yes.
so you understand that these are this is an extraordinary escalation versus just regular old
Escalation,
munitions
not
that you're
extraordinary
allowing.
escalation.
Well, I think it's a pretty
Escalation.
extraordinary escalation. It requires the surveillance satellites from either NATO or America.
Here's the thing:
and-
we're already giving everything that those satellites have to the Ukrainians anyway.
Yes,
I mean,
but
there's a philosophical argument about whether the Ukrainians are actually pressing the button on some of those weapons when they ask the Pentagon for permission every time they give target information.
I agree with you. There is a real question as to who's
Right.
really pressing the button. My point is, we all acknowledged for a very long time that you could never have live fire, like hot war between two nuclear powers, lest all of humanity become imperiled. We are as close as we have ever been to that being an obvious reality, that you have actual
Look,
American
it's been
troops
2
firing on
years,
Russian
man.
troops.
No, there's
ahead.
not going to be It's not going to be American troops. It's going to be Ukrainian troops using
Well, there's
American
not
provided stuff.
how many of them are left before it becomes American
enough,
troops?
man. Like enough. I mean, here's the thing. I'm against sending American troops in there. I'm against sending European.
So you think they can win
Well, I do
without
think they can win.
NATO?
I think they can win with enough weapons. They can win. Do they need European troops? I mean, I'm okay with the Polish army taking over border crossings in Poland and Ukraine. I'm okay with the Polish or French army, training Ukrainians on Ukrainian land. I'm even okay with the Polish and Romanian and Slovenian anti-air defense systems knocking Russian rockets out of the air if it's within the purview of their airspace. I have no problem with any of that. Do we need Slovenians fighting against Russians in Kharkiv? No, we don't. That's like not a great idea either. But we don't need that. The Ukrainians will get the job done if they just get enough arms themselves, you know?
I mean, that's been the claim for years, and obviously you'll claim that it's just because we have dragged our feet on providing them with the munitions that they need to defend themselves. But
I would claim that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know you would, but I would argue the opposite, that it doesn't matter, that Russia is eventually going to grind these people into dust, and then it's going to lead to NATO troops having to be basically bolstering their troop counts. In which case, it's just another escalation. Which, by the time we're having this debate 6 months from now, you will say, "I don't really see that as an escalation. That's not that. These are all escalations, man. We would have never. You had Joe Biden admitting openly years ago, no, we'll never give them F-16s. No, we'll never give them these. We'll never allow them to strike inside of Russia. Now we're doing all of that. This is obviously a ratchet effect that is happening over a multi-year period. It's very dangerous.
Do it, man.
Yeah, he didn't want to and why? Why didn't he want to? Because he knew it's fucking extraordinarily dangerous.
Well, he's a very timid character, and the people running the National Security Council are timid.
Joe Biden, timid.
Here's what I want to know. I'm very curious. So, Clint, can you paint a picture of, if we were to take the libertarian perspective on this, what are the steps that have to be done here, and what would be the outcome of taking those steps regarding Russia? So, Clint, let's paint the picture.
I think this isn't really even libertarian argumentation, because we wouldn't have these entangling alliances. We wouldn't have had these interferences, through the U.S. State Department into Ukraine, despite the fact that Vlad kind of denies that transpired or that it was very meaningful. So, these are all situations that largely a libertarian civilization would not be in. So it's very hard to then give a libertarian answer to how you get out of it. But I think that Trump's tact on this is probably appropriate. That he has had a better relationship with Putin than these other leaders, that I would love to see them use whatever pressure that he wants to apply in terms of, taking the sanctions down and trying to get them to the negotiating table to work towards peace. I think it's quite obvious that Crimea is going to remain a part of Russia. Aside from nuclear war, I don't see them relenting on the demands for possession of that territory. So that's kind of like the compromise position. Yes, you basically the same agreement that you had in March of 22, that you're going to have a buffer area in the eastern portion of what used to be Ukraine, which will become its own independent territory. It's largely Russian speaking. It still is to this day. Crimea becomes a part of Russia, and then the west of Ukraine becomes an independent nation state that is not that agrees to not be added to NATO. Sorry, go ahead.
What do Ukrainians get for that, man? Why would they give all?
Well, they stopped dying.
The problem is, without hard security guarantees, the Russians will just come back because they want all of Ukraine. They don't want a couple of territories. They want Kiev. They want Odessa. They want the southwest. Maybe they don't want Lviv. Maybe they're willing to have a little rump state in Lviv and in Ternopil or whatever. But the point is not a couple of territories in the east. The point is that the Russians hate the fact that there's independent Ukraine. They hate it, man. They hate that their ex-girlfriend is leaving them for the American guy who's got a bigger penis, or whatever. Or they hate that, and they're gonna beat her before she goes. They're gonna hit her like that. I'm just repeating what a member of the House of Lords said to me. A British member of the House of Lords, a Tory said that to me. A conservative member of a Tory House of Lords used that metaphor, which is why I'm repeating. Lest the woke identitarian essentialists come after me.
So if we're talking 5 years, 10 years from the point of, let's say, this peace that Trump makes, Trump's not going to be in office forever, somebody else is going to assume that position, what is going to happen to Russia now that Russia has that territory in your view, Clint?
Sure.
What will happen to Russia?
The kind of decisions that Russia's going to make from there.
I think, unfortunately, because most people in the kind of global State Department, the UN, NATO, neoliberal world order folks have Vlad's perspective in this, that they're going to be a pariah state for forevermore, at least as long as Putin is in power. So I don't think that dynamic is going to change. Unfortunately, I don't think that they're going to be welcomed into the wider world order anytime soon. So I think that these tensions are going to persist and exist for quite some time.
But it's interesting how you're blaming the rest of the world order rather than Russia for what Russia's going to do. So my question is, when we're talking about Russia as an active agent as opposed to somebody that gets beat up by the rest of the world what would Russia do?
Let me explain why. Because and Vlad can confirm or deny these claims, but my understanding is that Putin, as early as the late 90s and as late as the mid 2000s, was inquiring and asking very sincerely about being added into NATO. That they did not want to be in alliance with China, and instead of trying to work with them on those demands, particularly because the hardliners in Russia were Putin was actually very concerned about them. That during the application process to be added to NATO, that he thought he would be toppled. he wanted to have it be expedited. That was the only demand that he put on it, that he just wanted to be expedited to the top of the list so they didn't have to wait. They said, you know what? We're not interested. Well, they pretended as if they were interested, particularly Bill Clinton just lied through his fucking teeth, said, but we never had any intention of adding them into NATO.
I wasn't there, man. Look, it was a dictatorship.
I wasn't there either.
By the way, my girlfriend just texted me that she wants a shout out. A shout out to my beloved Laura Brickman, who is with me here in the thing, who's still very mad at me for something I did earlier today, and I'm very sorry, baby. Back to geopolitics. Leaving things with humor a little bit. Look, the Russians were never going to get into NATO because they're very serious. They're very serious criteria for getting into NATO. And Russia was already a pariah state, and Putin was already a dictator who came to power blowing up his own citizens in the Moscow bombings. And
the false
Russia
flag during that time being blamed on the Chechens.
Correct. It was never going to
happen.
Then
why have we been pretending that Ukraine's going to be added to NATO? They have very similar issues.
Well, Ukraine is further along in the criteria. Ukraine is actually a liberal democracy with all its problems, and it's huge issues. It has.
It's actually a liberal democracy with no elections.
Well, it had elections until the war started, until we had martial law, man. We had 6 presidents and 6 election cycles. It's pretty bad.
But they haven't. But they haven't had an election in 3 years, though. So I mean,
no,
and they also obviously have they also have a border dispute. I mean, they also have major issues with corruption. Like, they were never going to be approved for NATO either.
No. I mean, look, Ukraine with 10, 12 years could have gone into NATO. 1, 2, the corruption stuff was getting better gradually. 3, the elections were good for 5 years. The presidential mandate is 5 years. It just ran out, I believe, in May for Zelensky.
Right.
It's impossible to have a wartime election just by Ukrainian law. It's very complicated. It's just almost impossible to have elections in Ukraine because of constitutional stuff.
I'm just saying, if you think that Russia could have never got its act in order to be added to NATO, but Ukraine could have, I'm just making the argument that both were very far away from it.
If they eliminated all the members, of the KGB, now called the FSB, then I think we would have been talking about a different story by now. The problem is that Gorbachev, after the Soviet Union fell, he did not get rid of the KGB people, and
100%.
those are the same people who are stuck there. So it's almost like when we're talking about the cathedral and all these far lefty activists that are in charge
100%, 100%. You have to understand, the Nazis were denazified in Germany, and the Germans went through 30, 40 years of political process and atoning and internal psychological stuff in order to be a liberal democracy. The Ukrainians banned the Communist Party in 2015 and went through 8 years of decommunization and historical memory processes. The Russians never did that.
How can you make that argument as Azov battalions?
I was there, man.
But,
I love Azov, man. I'm a Jew. I love Azov. I'm the world's biggest Jewish defender of Azov, man. I love Azov.
Holy shit.
Azov.
That's crazy.
What Azov is? Look. You can read my.
You have
articles.
Stockholm syndrome?
No, man. Whatever. I know Jewish officers in Azov, man. Like, it doesn't matter. I know many Jewish officers in Azov. No one cares. It's not a blood and soil nationalist thing. Like, no. Like,
as they're driving around Sikh Island, there's no blood nationalism from those guys.
There were 2,500 guys in Azov, which is now part of the Interior Ministry, an Interior Ministry battalion. It started with some fascists in 2015. It's true. There were some fascists then. And I've hung out with a lot of these guys, and they're snipers and stuff. Of the original 100 guys, maybe like 14 or 15 were Nazis. It's true. Ever since 2015-16, it was taken into the Interior Ministry. It became just a normal battalion with normal army command. The amount of Nazis is down to probably like 1%. I don't care, man. It's like, we have a joke back in Odessa. We're all neo-Nazis now. The entire synagogue's like that.
Yeah, and if you're talking about like these neo-Nazis, think of the the Rusich battalion in Russia, which is primarily composed of like actual legit neo-Nazis. I don't think you're going to get any European country that's not going to have that kind of mentality.
This is let me interject real quick, because you guys continue to think that I'm speaking favorably of Russia just because I'm.
You're not.
No, I'm not. I just want to be very clear.
Yeah.
There are fucking battalions in Russia that are total Nazis too. So like,
100%.
I don't have my whole
more pro-Russian than you in the West.
Yeah, of course. My whole issue here is that I don't want to be fucking involved. That I do not want to imperil all of humanity by having America at loggerheads with Russia. Like, if the rest of the Eastern nations, they all fear that Putin's going to roll through Poland and roll through Eastern Europe after that, well, that's their right and that's their decision to make. America needs to get the fuck out of there. We can't afford it. We can't morally afford it. We don't morally have the authority to dictate these policies to the rest of the world anymore.
I don't agree with that, man.
Bankrupt.
I don't agree with that. First
We
of
are
all,
bleeding ourselves out.
We have all the money in the world, man.
No, we
have
don't.
all the. I mean, look, we've destroyed with 1% or 2% of Defense Department spending the Russian revisionist threat for 10 years. The Russians will spend the next 8 to 10 years rebuilding their army, and we did that with 2.5% of defense spending. Like, this was a bargain. If you're talking in truly sociopathic terms, which I prefer not to, I prefer to talk about values.
I'm glad you acknowledge that this is a sociopathic way of perceiving this thing, because
100%,
hundreds of thousands of people have died.
No, but we didn't want them to die. We begged the Russians not to do this, man. We threatened, we cajoled.
Well, if we didn't want them to die, then we would have accepted the terms in March of 22.
Who's we, man? The Ukrainians. I wasn't at the table. Neither were you.
Who's we? I mean, yeah, no, neither of us were there. But this is widely reported that in fact it was the U.S. State Department that intervened. That had already been initialed by Zelensky. That the terms were largely acceptable to the Ukrainians.
Man, like the Ukrainians didn't yet know what had gone on in the occupied territories. Once we saw what happened in any territory occupied by Russia, but now, there was no interest on. Once we saw what happened in the occupied territories, nobody wanted to give a ceasefire, because it was obvious that once the Russians rebuilt, and they would rebuild and rearm and reman 3 times faster than the Ukrainians, they would try again. That's the problem. Is with the Russians, you either have to win, or they'll destroy you, or they'll take a ceasefire. They have better demographics and material plant and more money. They'll rearm and they'll try again in 3 years, right? This is the problem. You can't stop without hard security guarantees. That's the issue.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, I mean
it's a really hard one. Man.
Like
That's
everything, Clint, that you're talking about, I think it is important for people to consider those who, are like these neocons that just want to make money from war, which is obviously a horrible thing. And obviously,
there were some of those people I go on vacation with. Like, I like the Kagans. Yeah. I like those, but I'm not one of them, man.
But like everything you're talking about right now, Clint, when you're talking about this being, a world, danger, I completely, and Vlad agrees 100% that it's a world danger, but we agree on 100%. It from the other side of the equation, which I think is just due to maybe people who are more on the libertarian side not thinking this through as much. Maybe it's because certain pieces of information are missing, and that's kind of what I wanted to...
Not really. This is the Chamberlainian versus Churchillian argument. I mean, basically the argument is that if you appease Putin, that there will be eventually a larger war and a nuclear exchange, because he will have then made an incursion into the rest of Eastern Europe.
I agree with that.
My argument is that this myth about World War II, that we have to stop him now lest we have to stop him later and at far greater cost, does not apply here. In fact, if you look at Russia's challenges in just taking over Ukraine, the perception that they have the capacity to roll across the rest of Europe, I think is nonsensical. I don't think that it would ever come to that. So I don't think that we are facing that sort of same situation. But if you approach it with that same mental framework, then you create the escalatory trap that we now face. And that is what I perceive as being the greatest threat to humanity at this junction, is this perception that we are once again in these World War II type dynamics, when I don't think that's what we're facing at all. That this is largely a border dispute between two countries that are not NATO member states, that we should not be intervening on, and that we should not have been intervening hanging on for over a decade now, which has obviously increased the tensions there. I think that it has been U.S. State Department policy that has largely fomented this crisis. And I'm sure Vlad disagrees, but I still think that there's
Not enough State Department fomenting. I would have liked more.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
so this is the different in perception. It's I
Right.
don't think that I am in fact like diminishing the threat. I'm emphasizing the current threat. Well, you guys are diminishing the current threat and emphasizing the next one.
Okay, Clint, Lev, my phone is at 3%. My
I
girlfriend who loves me
wanted
is
to
mad
at
at me, wants
least
me to
I
come.
wanted to at least say something about the main
Yes.
subject, which is the Trump assassin guy. One
Oh,
question.
yeah, let's
No,
go
we
back
didn't
to
even
that.
get to that.
Yes.
Jesus
No,
Christ.
no.
2 minutes, man.
Okay, 2 minutes. Okay, why do you think he's not like some MK Ultra Manchurian candidate? That's what I wanted to ask Vlad.
Because life's too boring for that, man. Because the CIA is not that original. I wish they were, man. I wish the CIA was that good. They're not. I'm sorry. They're like the fact is the craziness of American politics foments this insanity, and just there's a lot of psychosis in the ether. And Trump's superpower, as the kids say, is to make people crazy, including his enemies, and he plays them like a fiddle. And he's on top of he's the apex predator on top of a social media pyramid. And there's a lot of crazy people out there. Some of them who went to Ukraine, which is the country of my ancestors, which I love, who have come back and tried to get their fix somewhere else. And if only, but I don't think the CIA would do it because they couldn't get away with it, man. Like and like there's the idea that the CIA is liberal democratic and the FBI is conservative Republican. Maybe there is a deep state. Okay, yeah, and they don't like Trump. Sure, would they actually try to kill him, knowing what it would do to the country? And if they did, why would they
Yes.
use a psycho like that, like a schizoid psycho who's sitting outside?
Plausible deniability.
Let's see if Vlad has an answer to that, or if his phone is completely fried right now. I mean, it could be possible that they allowed certain things to transpire, but in terms of actually doing it, if somebody was to do something of that nature, would they not use like some kind of, like the Russians like to use, like some kind of an untraceable amount of some powder that they would put on,
Sure,
like the
yeah.
doorknob, something like that?
I think that's certainly possible, but I also think that it gives them greater plausible deniability if it's just some lunatic, a Sirhan, or one of those characters.
Why not cook his heart with a microwave beam or something? Like, I mean, if our government really has 800 billion, trillion, zillion, gajillion dollars worth of James Bond weaponry, why not just like?
Well,
I don't know.
I think that's a really good question, and a lot of people are asking themselves that, like, is the fact that, for instance, they had not been covering Trump's campaign events until Butler, Pennsylvania. Perhaps they wanted him in HD, in live time, being eviscerated because they want to send a chill down the spine of all populist right-wing movements across the world. That's a distinct possibility. Now, that's a very dramatic maneuver, and I'm not at all saying that that's a definitive yes, but I'm just saying, like, that I can, if you want to talk in sociopathic terms, if I was a sociopath that really doesn't like populist right-wing movements, I would say, hey, let's have this, like, the top dude for all populist right-wing movements all over the world, let's have his head just be eviscerated in HD, in live time. That would be the logic behind it.
Here's the thing. I have some sympathy for populist movements, both left and right, and I also talk to people in our government who are involved in these things who I don't think are competent to do this kind of thing.
You don't think
it's
they're
obvious to
competent?
me.
You don't think they're competent to assassinate a president?
With control of the federal bureaucracy, you could. I mean, yeah, they could, but
Do they not have control of the federal bureaucracy? Are they not the federal bureaucracy? What are we
they
talking about?
do. But like, I mean, like they have it, man. But then, like, if you're gonna do it and kill Trump, you're gonna have civil war in America. You are. The next day, you're gonna have tens
Right.
of hundreds of thousands of people killed.
Patriot Act
died,
2.0, and then gun confiscation, and then you just roll across the
yeah,
people.
there's too many guns, man. Like, I know, like the liberals and the progressives know very well there are far too many armed weirdos and crazies and like
Yeah,
patriots
that's why
in
they've been trying to
America.
disarm us my entire lifetime. Yeah, I agree.
350 million guns or 400 million guns. It's impossible. This is in Australia. I think they would
No,
like
it's
to do
it's
that.
over
Some of them.
half a billion guns in America at minimum.
Okay, good for you, man. Do you have one for me? I'd like one.
I think it would be illegal for me to transfer that to you, buddy.
I only learned to shoot during the war. I have to tell you.
Yeah.
I'm not from red country, but I do like red America. I have no problem with it.
Wait, Vlad, are
Being
you a
structurally-
citizen of the United States?
Of course I am.
Yeah, you are.
100%.
So there shouldn't be a problem, right, with legal gun transfer?
Yeah, well, I'm not transferring a gun to. Where you're in Portugal?
Yeah. There are no guns in Portugal. All right, I'll pop in. Where are you now, man?
Yeah, in Florida, I'll give you one.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I'm kidding,
Well, I'll
feds.
pop
If you're
over.
watching this, I'm not giving them a fucking
No.
gun.
No one's gonna. No one cares, man. No one cares.
Oh, they
So,
care.
Even the,
They care. One of my
even the
good
feds
friends
aren't that humorless.
was just interviewed by the FBI.
Oh,
yesterday.
Jeremy Kaufman.
Jeremy Kaufman.
Yeah, shout out to
Yeah.
Jeremy Kaufman. That was very ballsy of him, but I think he did a good job. He kept them all in check. So yeah, so I know Vlad's battery is dying right now.
My battery's a 1% chance.
Yes.
Let's have our pleasant.
All right, do your outro, brother. Just tell people where they can follow you.
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Twitter Davidzon Vladislav or Vladislav Davidzon. You can find me very easily. You could read my stuff on Foreign Policy Magazine at the Atlantic Council. I write for Tablet Magazine. I write for numerous publications. I am a friend of counter elites everywhere, and I'm a good American, despite the fact that I'm from New York.
And next, we're going to do a round table, have you and Davey Smith and Vlad and myself and members of the Atlantic Council just sitting down and just having
that would be insane.
good old-fashioned...
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
look, this is where we are right
Yeah.
now, man. This is what I'm trying
All
to
right.
build with this platform, Break the
No,
Rules.
I love it.
Lev,
I mean,
thank you
this
so
was-
much for having
yeah.
me on. Clint, is really nice to meet you. You're a very bright guy.
You too.
You know a lot of stuff. I'm very impressed. Chance, I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
brother. Enjoy your vacation.
Now, before we go, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, if you guys don't know, patreon.com/breaktherules. I have a Patreon, but one of my patrons recently got stabbed in the street. He got stabbed in the liver. So I set up a GoFundMe for him. I linked the GoFundMe over here in the chat. You guys could see it. Help Francisco get a life-saving transplant. So over here he says,
awesome.
I've never imagined life would take such a drastic turn for my dear friend Francisco, a strong, healthy 29-year-old man who has always been the backbone to his family. For years, he's lived a normal, healthy life dedicated to his loved ones. However, on June 23rd, his world turned upside down after being assaulted with a lethal weapon. The severity of his injury has left him unable to eat or drink and is totally reliant on an IV and a feeding bag for his nutrition. So right now they're going to be doing a transplant, and we've currently raised $28,505. So guys, if you want to pitch in, help my friend, I definitely believe in patronage and helping each other out and all of that. So a BTR patron is always a friend in need, a friend indeed. So guys, please support Francisco, help get the word out about the transplant. And also, if you guys have enjoyed this episode and if you want to keep more of these conversations going, I mean, again, like, where else are you going to have this meeting
That
of
was
these?
that was pretty wild.
Yeah, but that's very important, right? Because I fear that too many people within various bubbles are kind of getting into this mode of, maybe even subconsciously, what can I say that's not going to lose me subscribers? It may not even be something that people are aware of, but at that point, you're only having the self-referencing bubble, aren't you? You know what I mean? Like, where you're only talking about the things that the people want to hear, and that's death to any kind of pursuit of
I
truth.
agree. And for the record, I mean, the reason I accepted this is because I thought it was such a great opportunity to have my ideas seep into the mind of an
Yes.
Atlantic Council person. Like, so that's how I perceive these things, and I'm sure he felt the same way. But like, I think I totally agree with your. I mean, the format that you're pushing forward is fantastic. I love being able to actually engage with people that I consider to be basically my ideological opponents. Like, he was a very nice guy, but in terms of ideology, like in terms of foreign policy, we couldn't be much
Yes.
more different. So I thought it was a fantastic opportunity to do so, and I think that the audience will take a lot away from this. That, like, to have these two worldviews clash when clearly we're both knowledgeable on this area, and it's like, well, who do you think's right? Like, that. Let's now let people actually think about this, as opposed to the lockstep you must die for
Yeah.
Ukraine mentality that so many Americans have been pushed by the corporate media.
And where I think we end up narrowing things down to, because there's a lot of fluff that goes on in these conversations saying, oh, what about this? What about that? Ultimately, the big disagreement, I think, boils down to whether or not we think Russia is going to expand, whether Putin is going to go beyond, not right now, but maybe like in 5 years, 10 years after there is some kind of peace deal. I personally, again, you probably know this, Clint, I lean on him definitely expanding, and one of the reasons is because of China. Like, I don't view Russia as like Russia. I view Russia as being just a attack dog that China is using to get sovereignty over the world. And what I don't like to see people like Gavin Newsom, who, cares absolutely nothing about California, but the moment that Winnie the Pooh's Xi Jinping appeared, that's when he cleaned things up. It's like he's like the guy who's living on planet Earth and working for the Elysium people, giving them, you know what I mean, all of the goodies while giving complete crap to the people below.
Gavin Newsom's a real Manchurian candidate, but not actually for Manchuria, not for the U.S. CIA or anything like that.
So even if you disagree with Vlad and myself about whether it's going to happen or not, I think we can both agree that that kind of scenario is not one that we will want to see. Like, we just happen to think that it's going to happen if we're not going to stop Russia because, it's going to get even more money from China later on, and it's going to save its energy and then keep expanding further and further. And to me, it's like, okay, if we don't stop them now, then they're going to get stronger and stronger and keep going. And then it's going to be a lot more costlier, both in terms of lives and money, even though obviously the second one is far less important to stop.
Yeah, and there's a real conflict in the perception that Vlad was pushing. For instance, like, he's saying basically he believes that Ukraine will defeat Russia in eastern Ukraine, but at the same time, like, there's a chance that they won't defeat them, and then they will also conquer the rest of Europe. And it's like, well, those seem like very conflicted worldviews. That, like, if we don't stop them there, they're going to roll across here, but they can't even take out Kiev. Like, really? So my perception is that Russia is a serious power in terms of nuclear capacity, but not the most serious power. Certainly not the old Russian army or the Soviet army.
By the way, I wouldn't glamorize the Soviet army either. I think
American got their teeth kicked
money,
in a lot.
Not only that, but like American money, I think, was primarily responsible for them beating Germany, because they were losing to Germany for a long ass time until FDR started sending a lot of our supplies into Russia. So,
but in terms of like national wealth, in terms of how do I say this that it makes sense, comparatively to the rest of the world. Like, they were a very wealthy nation back then in comparison to most of the rest of the world, but they are no longer that. Like, compared to China GDP, American GDP, most of the European nations' GDP, like, they're a relatively poor nation. So I just don't think that they have the financial capacity or the population size to really become the threat that you guys seem to be concerned about them being.
I would just, again, not focus on Russia as Russia. I would just focus it on
you're
the arm of China.
Yeah,
sure. So that way, I would just think of it as like China pumping money into Russia whenever it sees the need to do so. And that's why, even if it's not the case right now, if China sees like, hey, there's a chance now that Russia's acquired this piece of Ukraine, we'll just give it a little bit more money and then slowly over time.
So your perception is that this is a double-sided proxy war. That in fact it is China using Russia and us using Ukraine to fight each other.
I would say that it is China using Russia 100%. And as far as the using of Ukraine itself, and again, like, you could speak more to Vlad about this, but from his experience on the ground, the Ukrainians themselves, they want to defend their own.
They want to fight.
Yeah.
No, I'll grant you that, but I think that many of the Russians also want to fight too. So
actually, a lot of the Russians tend to be like, I don't know if you've seen these this footage of Russian soldiers being tied to the tree and then, like, at best, like, being whipped. It's like a lot of them don't want to.
I've seen that footage on the Ukrainian side too, of Ukrainian soldiers that are being conscripted that are sprinting away from the vans and things like that. So I don't know what percentage.
Sure, like some of them could be running away, but again, like, in the grand scheme of things here, what exactly Russia's fighting for. It's this World War II fetishism, but I really don't want us to think that what the Ukrainians are fighting for would be like that transgender person who was the voice of the Ukrainians for months and months.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
not
yeah.
what I don't think that's what they're about, dude. And I think it's this weird kind of what do you call it, Hegelian dialectic, where a lot of the liberals I notice who would have never supported Ukraine in their lives are supporting Ukraine just because their side wants them to support Ukraine. And on the other side, the Republicans don't support Ukraine because the Democrats are supporting Ukraine. It's like this very primitive kind of mentality.
You're right, but just for the record, I have been extraordinarily principled on
Of course.
all foreign interventions,
Yes.
and I am not adjusting my perceptions based off of how Trump feels about it or how Biden
No,
or
no,
Kamala
no.
Harris feels about it. Like I oppose this on principled grounds. I think it's extraordinarily dangerous. I think that we are ultimately plus we're 35 like he said, we've got infinite money. I'm sorry, modern monetary theory is garbage, and we can debate that at a different time. We do not have fucking infinite money. We are absolutely bankrupt, and we are going to deal with severe inflation as a consequence if we get into a wider war. So we need to avoid that.
No, of course we need to avoid that, which again, my perception is that in order to avoid that, we have to stop it before it gets to
I know,
too big.
Winston.
Yes.
I know, Mr. Churchill. I know what your arguments are. I just
Yes.
disagree. Anyways,
No,
thank
that's
you so
fine.
much for having me, Lev. It was a real
Clint,
pleasure.
it was a great pleasure. Where could we find you, brother?
At Liberty Lock Pod on X, Liberty Lockdown's the show. Since we actually didn't end up debating the topic at hand, my episode of Liberty Lockdown that aired late last night is a deep dive into the bizarre nature of this would-be assassin. I think people will learn a lot from it. It is an absolutely fascinating backdrop. As I've said, I'm not making any claims as to this guy being MK Ultra or anything like that. I'm just saying he's got some of the hallmarks. He's an extraordinarily strange figure, and I think it begs the question, given all of the persecution that Trump has suffered. Again, I say this not as a Trump supporter, never voted for the guy. In fact, I ran against him. I was almost the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. I came short by about 30 delegates, so I was actually going to be running against this guy. I don't say any of this as a supporter. I say this as a concerned American, that it does appear that there's a distinct possibility that the United States government is in fact hunting Donald Trump, and I think people ought to consider what that means if so. So Liberty Lockdown's the show. I also do the Best Political Show with Luke Radowski, who's Polish and very concerned about these wars as well. And I do Tower Gang, which you should never ever watch because it's racist and retarded. So thank you for having me, Lev.
Thank you so much, Clint. Always a great pleasure to have you on. Be sure to subscribe to all of Clint's shows, including Tower Gang. And also, once again, patreon.com/break the rules. And I'm posting the fundraiser one last time for those who did not see it. My friend Francisco got stabbed in the street. He's a BTR patron and he needs your help. So go there and do that right now. And of course, be sure to like, subscribe, click the bell. The bell is extremely important. I love you all. Thank you so much for watching, and we're going to see you next week. We're going to be having a debate about migration, the illegal migration that's going on right now, and that's going to be with J.J. Carell, former Border Patrol officer, and our good friend of the show, Armand Domolowski, is coming on, who is a more of a liberal, progressive person, although not like super far left, from San Francisco. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to that. And as always, there's going to be more clips coming on. Become a patron today. You're going to get episodes of this as an MP3 form after they come out. And $20 patrons, you guys, if you're within the New York City area or are planning on being in the New York City area, you are going to have a chance to be in the recording studio when we do an episode. We're going to have one with Jason Resiger Johnny coming up soon, and you're going to be there. You're going to be watching the recording, and then we're going to have a nice rooftop party on top of my condo. It's a beautiful rooftop, gorgeous. It has great views of the city, and we're just going to be having a nice, intimate, maybe 7 people get together there. So if you guys want to be a part of that, patreon.com/break the rules. Go become a part of what is being built right now, because like you saw here today, there's no podcast out there, no live stream out there like Break the Rules, where you have a chance to bring all these people from different circles together. And lastly, I want to say we got King of Biltong with the 30 USD, says thank you, Lev. If you guys listen, in my fridge over there, I have so much biltong, my stomach is so full of salted meat right now. I don't know, like I'm probably going to have to eat a lot of bananas in order to get the potassium and balance all of that out. But if you guys go into biltongusa.com, I guarantee that as long as you pace yourself, you're unlike me, you guys are going to have a great time enjoying Anton's sweet meat. It's quite a delicious treat. And my favorite are the beef sticks. If you put in code word BTR at checkout, it's free shipping, and BTR10, it's going to be 10% off your delicious biltong. Hail to the biltong. I love it so much. I can't wait to eat some more carbonasi and elk meat after this stream. But again, I got to get some bananas to pace myself. So guys, thank you so much for watching. I will see you later. Be sure to smash that subscribe button once again. Mwah. Good night, everybody.